Hello, and welcome to WFMT's Classical Conversations, in which we have the pleasure of talking with the most engaging people in classical music and in the arts. I could not be more thrilled for today's classical conversation presented in connection with WTTW's Chicago's Stories, The Birth of Gospel, which will premiere on all WTTW platforms on Friday, May 6th at 8 p.m. Central. Today, I have the honor of interviewing Dr. C. Charles Clency, music educator, author, gospel pioneer, and the last accompanist of Mahalia Jackson. Today, we'll discuss gospel music and its importance in the Black religious tradition, what it was like playing with Mahalia Jackson, and his own musical journey. Now, before we get things going, I'd like to extend a very special thanks to the supporters of this project, who you can see listed here. Without the generous support of these donors, sponsors, and WTTW members, Chicago Stories and the Birth of Gospel would not have been possible. And now I would like to invite our honored guest, Dr. Clency, to join us now. Dr. Clency, welcome, and thank you so much for joining and talking with us today.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you just fine, and I can see you perfectly.
Okay.
Now, I have to tell you, Dr. Clency, I'm going to try and quell the starstruckedness because I have right now, because I'm like,
oh no,
I can't believe I'm talking to you. But it's a real honor to talk with you today. So again, thank you for joining us in this conversation.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So let's just kind of get started in a light way. There's so much to cover about your history and what you've done. But after doing some digging, I found out that, you know, you grew up in the church, obviously. And am I to remember correctly that, did you want to play the keyboard or the organ? Or was that forced on you?
I did, in fact, not without any thought of anything beyond wanting to do it. I had no thought at all about a future or a career. Right. I was too young to even know what the words meant. But I was 6 years old. And so I did private piano study for about 6 or 7 or 8 years.
Wow.
And in high school, I had thought about becoming a journalist because of my writing skills. I was a writer and I just wanted to be a journalist. Right. And my music teacher in high school said, oh, no, you must go into music. So that's it.
That's the story. And what a difference you would think that a teacher would be like, oh no, go the journalist route. But your music teacher was like, no, you need to play the piano. That's amazing. And obviously you've been such a, like I said, a pioneer in gospel music alone, you know, for so long, but you also were present as gospel music started to become very mainstream, because, you know, before the 60s, I would say gospel music was a very kind of siloed thing in the Black church, but it started to become mainstream, and you were present as that happened. And as broadcasting in churches started to happen. Tell me a little bit about that, just your experience in churches.
It just happened. I was just at the age, in the right place. Chicago being the capital was home for me. And it was right at the time that gospel music, or actual music in the Black church, was becoming mainstream, I guess the word is.
Right.
And so I was, my piano study evolved into organ at the church. And I actually studied the organ and played the organ for church.
Right.
And that was like the beginning. That I'm like 13 or 14 now, still without any thought of a career, but I didn't even know that I was actually being exposed to a great tradition of the gospel music. I had no idea. I just liked what I was doing. It was for the moment. And it was just something that I loved doing. Playing for everything. And I grew up actually 7 blocks from the church where the first gospel choir was organized, was formed. Ebenezer Baptist Church.
Right.
45th Street.
Yeah.
I lived on 38th Street. Then I was 7 blocks the other way to the church where the quote unquote father of gospel music worked. Pilgrim Baptist Church.
Right.
I was right in the middle of all this.
Right.
Action.
You were right in the center of it.
Yeah,
all.
without even knowing what the significance of all that meant. And so my church was a block from where I lived. So I had that opportunity to be actually in the middle between going to church, taking organ lessons, and being between Pilgrim and Ebenezer.
Wow. So go ahead.
I had this tremendous opportunity. And in the meantime, listening to a lot of choirs and singers without knowing what all that meant. I just did it.
Right. So not only are you, physically in the city where gospel music is the epicenter, really, but you are actually in the center of that city where you have access to all of the different aspects of how that gospel music was growing. I mean, how could you not be involved? Like you said, it wasn't really a thought. You just were there.
Right.
That's amazing.
Right. Exactly.
And so I have to ask you, and this is just because I don't claim to be a musician. I mean, I'm a singer, but I cannot play the organ at all. Every time I look at it, I'm like, how do you do? Do you have a preference? If you had to choose, what is your preference? Is it keyboard? Is it organ? Specifically in the church, what do you feel like is most effective?
Well, I like both. I was trained in the classical tradition, piano, and I played church. I played organ in church. So both instruments were major for me. I'm comfortable either way, piano, organ. I have no real preference of either. Gospel or non-gospel. I'm fine with piano, organ. I read, which set me apart a little bit, I guess. And whether I played anthems or hymns, spirituals, or played gospel music, I was fine. And I didn't even know what this meant. I did not know that it was a wonderful thing to do. I just did it. And it felt good. And I was happy doing it without knowing why I was happy. I just loved what I was doing.
Right. And now, speaking of maybe not knowing where, the time that you were in and the influence that you were making, also, you are actually, am I to understand that you collaborated with Kenny Morris, right?
Yeah.
So for those who,
it wasn't so much a collaboration as it was just a friendship.
Yeah.
And he was much older, obviously. And I looked up to him and admired him. And he was the director of the church where I went to when I was 21, Antioch Church that just burned. Antioch Baptist Church. I was there in 1962. And I was an organist for the entire church. There were 5 choirs, and he, Kelly Morris, was director of one of the choirs. And I played for him.
Now, for those
without knowing who he really was.
And I was just going to say, for those who don't know who Kenny Morris is, he's actually credited for introducing the Hammond organ to the Black church, period.
Yes.
So you were working with him. Wow.
Yeah. Well, I was playing the organ.
Yeah.
The Hammond organ, without knowing this man, Kelly Morris, was the man who was responsible for that organ being in especially Black churches,
Right.
and being the instrument for gospel music versus the pipe organ.
Right.
And so, which was far, far, far more costly. And so there we were, 1939. And of course, it was like 10 plus years later that I planned to have an organ without knowing he was the person. He's in the same church. I had no idea of his greatness and what he meant to the Black church in terms of the musical tradition. I had no idea. We were friends. We would go between parts of the service, especially during the sermons. He and I would get away and go downstairs at Antioch and eat for about the 20, 25 minutes of the sermon. And so we were friends. And I, like a 20-year-old to a 40-year-old, but he still was a good person. Yeah. And I remember him as being a chain smoker, an older man, quiet in his own way. And we didn't collaborate, but we were just friends. And I played. He would tell me different things if he wanted this or that. Specifically with music, he would tell me what he wanted, which was not often because most of the things I just knew. I felt the things, and I was there because I guess they thought I was good. So I played the organ, and his wife, Nisi, played the piano.
Wow. Wow.
And then when I came back to Chicago after being away from graduate school, I was shocked to hear that he had passed away in 1989.
Right.
So we never, after I left Antioch, I never had that one-on-one contact, even though I would go to his store, his publishing store.
Right.
But we never really had that close one-on-one connection after I left Antioch, which was in 1962. I left the church.
Right.
I'm wrong, 65. I went there 62 and left there 65.
Now, go ahead.
It was a joy.
We might touch on this a little bit later, but and I have to admit, I'm not a Chicago native. So, I might trip up on some of the questions or things, but.
Where are you from?
I'm actually from DC. So I know a little bit about the DC Black church scene.
Me too.
Not Chicago. But it seems like before you left Chicago, am I correct in thinking that you were playing at several churches in the area, right?
Yes. At one time, I was actually at 4 churches, different times. So the church Chicago was, I'm not sure about now, all day Sunday church, Sunday town. From sun up to sundown.
Wow.
All day. So I played at the church, the first Pentecostal church and at 1:30. And then at few o'clock, I played for another Baptist church. At then another church at 9:30, and another church at 11 o'clock at night. So I was playing for 4 churches. And I'm just like 20, 21 years old doing this.
Right. Now the times might have changed, but the tradition is still the same. Musicians are playing from sun up to sundown on Sundays. That's just how it goes.
Yes. Well, the churches I played for were radio churches. So I played for 3 radio churches plus my own church, which was not radio.
Right.
But still, it was.
So before we move on, I want to remind the audience who's watching this conversation that you can ask questions. You can put them in the chat and they'll be fielded to us, and we'll have time at the end of the conversation to answer some of these questions. So if there's something that comes up or you want some clarification from Dr. Clency, please feel free to drop those questions. We'd love to get to them. So I can imagine that a lot of people probably know Dr. Clency's name as Mahalia Jackson's the most recent or last accompanist for Mahalia Jackson. And before we go into that conversation, I'd love to just play a clip of Mahalia Jackson and you on the organ playing with her. So we'll watch that now. Woo! Now that video to me is just as much about Mahalia Jackson as it is about you on the organ. Oh my goodness.
Oh, thank you. Can I just tell you something?
Please.
That song was written by somebody who worked at the church where Kenneth Morris put the organ in.
Oh, wow.
He put the organ in 39 or 40, and that song was written in 55 by the same musician, well, by the same church musician, who's now no longer with us.
Wow.
So it's very, very much a coincidence. And I'm not even sure that that church realizes themselves who that person was. Well, they may, but he wasn't there alone, but he wrote that song.
Wow.
Harold Smith, Detroit, Michigan.
And what a song, really.
Oh yeah, great song. And that choir at the church where Kenneth Morris was used to sing. They were the first who brought it out. They recorded that, and Mahalia took it and put on spin and twist the things that she always did.
Right. So tell me a little bit about just your relationship with Mahalia Jackson, and what was it like working with and playing for such an incredible artist?
Well, it was fantastic. We just did not know that it would not be long. No, I wasn't with her long enough, but the time that we had, which was over 5 years, was fantastic. I was so accustomed to getting a phone call. Let's go to Cleveland. Let's go to Detroit. Go to Philadelphia. We got to go to Paris, France. We got to be in Germany next week. So she was tremendous. She was a good person. We taught her some things, but Mahalia was not kind of person you could teach. We would give her a melody and she would do her own thing with it. We leave her alone. Because we know that when Mahalia finished the song, it would be Mahalia, nobody else could ever duplicate.
Right.
So she was a great person, and we never had a cross word at all. I'm sorry, I hope you can still hear me. But it was a tremendous experience working with her. She was a good person, and I had many long conversations with her about very simple things, but she was just really wonderful person. Not about music, because we learned that we could not teach her. We could only show her, introduce a melody to her, and she would just take it after that and make her own. Wow! So it was just so wonderful.
So tell me a little bit about the phone call. When you got the phone call that said, "Hey, I need you to play for Mahalia Jackson," what was your response?
Well, it really wasn't a phone call. It was an invitation to go to her house just to go over some things with her. And I was so young, I didn't think anything about it. I was just going to go over some songs. So we had been there. I had been there with her for about 35 or 40 minutes. And she said, "My boy, you play so nice. You want to go with me?" And I said, "Yes, ma'am." No talk about contract, nothing about money. I was just ready to go. I was just young enough to want to explore and experiment and travel.
Right.
And so that was it. It was all, I think, planned all along, but I never knew it. So there was not a phone call. It was just me being there and her asking me right on the spot, "Would you like to go with me and play for me?" And I said, "Yes, ma'am." That was it.
Well, as is evident from the video we just watched, you did play. I mean, goodness.
Well, Lorraine Garreau talks about this a lot in her autobiography of Mahalia. Mahalia did the autobiography. Lorraine Garreau was there, and she talks about me and how I got with her and how she was totally convinced that I was the right person with her, which may be why I was the last organist that she had.
Wow.
But she was very comfortable. She was extremely comfortable. There were two pianists in one organist. I was the organist, and there were two pianists.
Right. So Mahalia Jackson is obviously known to many people for being kind of a pivotal voice, literally, during the civil rights movement. Did you have any involvement with Mahalia Jackson during that period of her career, and as she was singing? Were you playing with her then?
Yeah. The last part of her involvement with the civil rights movement was when I was with her. Not that much. She had begun, after Dr. King was assassinated, Mahalia had begun to back off a little from her involvement, but she was staunch and very much involved in the 50s. I was not with her until the latter 60s.
Right.
She supported many political causes, and she was very, very much involved in the push for voting rights. And she had alliances with, as I said, with Dr. King and Malcolm X, and many congressmen. I met a lot of people because of her connections with them. Wow. So she was very much involved. In fact, I think her house was known as the home of the Democratic Party, where she had so much food and she would host all of the politicians. So she was a very, very major part of politics. And the last part of her life she had pulled back. After she was very distressed over Dr. King's passing, his death. And so she pulled out of it a little bit after he died. He died in 1968 and she died 4 years later.
Right, right.
So it wasn't that much time between the two deaths.
Well, let's actually watch a video now of Mahalia singing. I think Martin Luther King is preaching at a church here in Chicago and Mahalia Jackson is singing. We'll watch that.
I think I can say concerning this great gospel singer in our midst, our dear friend, my great friend Mahalia Jackson, that a voice like this comes only once in a millennium. If there is any doubt in anybody's mind concerning whether we have a movement here in Chicago, you ought to be in this church tonight.
I really get chills watching that video. It's amazing to just think about the connection between Martin Luther King and Mahalia Jackson. It's amazing.
Right. That video says a lot. Yeah.
Absolutely. And again, to know that you have been in the same room with Martin Luther King, perhaps, and Malcolm X, and so many others with Mahalia
Actually, the
Jackson.
organist, I'm the organist on that particular piece.
I thought so. I thought that might have been you.
I've forgotten that's what age does. I forgot that I played that.
That's incredible.
New Covenant Baptist Church.
Right. So what was it like being in that room?
Oh my goodness, electrifying. She was electrifying. You could not listen to me without feeling that joy, that passion. And I miss it. I miss it. Even today, I miss it. But it was just fantastic.
And it seems like it kind of came spontaneously. Was it just, she just got up and started singing almost?
Everything was spontaneity. They would plan it, it wouldn't work. Yep. Yeah.
Oh my goodness, that's amazing. Dr. Clency, you are such a pivotal person in the industry. And actually, I again, doing some digging, found out that, you know, for those who listen to gospel music, there's a very, very famous gospel song, Jesus Can Work It Out. Can you tell me a little bit, because I think you taught, or you were the musician at what is it, Cosmopolitan Church?
Yes, yes.
And
I
that's
taught
here
the
in
song.
Chicago.
I
You
taught
taught that song.
but I taught it. The recording that you hear is not me.
Okay.
I taught the song before that. We did it in a different key and with a different soloist.
Mhm.
Diane was not at the church yet.
Wow.
And the song was written by George Jordan,
Mm-hmm.
and from Detroit, who was in Chicago at the time, living in Chicago. And it was done. George recorded it and sang it with the Christian Tabernacle Choir, much different from Cosmopolitan and Diane Williams. So I taught it the way George had written it.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, Diane took it and made it a different song, and it swept the world.
Right.
And
I was going to ask you.
Yeah, I had left the church. I left the church in 76, went away to graduate school, and that's when they recorded that particular version. In fact, that was probably the second. They did it 2 or 3 times.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a third version, same song, but it's really the same version, but just a third time they did it with more instruments.
Right.
But that song was done. I did that song with them in 71 or 72.
Mm-hmm.
And the recording that everybody knows now was done around 77.
Wow. I mean, when I grew up and when I was little, this was the song. I could not walk into a church, and if the choir was singing this song.
Oh my goodness.
So I just can't even believe that I'm talking to you right now. Let's hear a little bit of that song for anybody who wants to know what song I'm talking about. We'll hear just a little bit of it. I mean, just
that's Diane.
Yeah,
that's Diane. It's over when she sings. It's over.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
In fact, that choir and Diane together. Like I saw Father Hayes there with the black robe on.
Yeah.
Yeah. They were always good. I was there 11 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I went there at 65, and that was recorded probably, as I said before, it's around 77.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when I did it, we didn't record. The song was not recorded. It was just sung very well. But it became a real recorded commercial hit with that version of Diane.
Right. So I want to just mention once more to the audience that we are taking questions. So if you've got a question that you want to ask to Dr. Clency, now is the time to do so. Before I get to the question, I just want to talk really quickly. Dr. Clency, you wrote a definitive book on gospel music called The Handbook of Gospel Music. Can you let the listeners know what can they expect to learn or read in this book?
First, the definition of gospel. I tried to define gospel in the book. I probably used too many words. And then the history of gospel music and factors that made gospel evolve from the spiritual.
Right.
And then names of representative composers and other artists who had a lot to do with the popularity of gospel. And the last, there are strategies listed for helping future gospel directors and musicians. So about 4 the definition, history, names of composers and artists, and strategies for helping potential gospel music directors and musicians. So I have 2 other books now coming out, but that was the very first one, and I probably should have had it in 2 or 3 volumes because it's really almost too much for one volume.
There's not so much. I mean, you can just, there's so much you can talk about, right?
Yeah, you're right. And I was with all I got. I started writing, it couldn't stop.
Hey, well, mine is on the way, and I'm ready. I'm ready to get into it.
Yeah, I heard. I was going to ask you about that. So that fantastic.
Okay, so we got a question, and kind of dovetailing right off of the book. Dr. Clency, could you define gospel music for us?
Yeah, gospel music. First, there must be passion and joy in writing or performing the gospel music. But gospel music, if I can put it into just a word or two, is simply rhythms, unique rhythms that are unique to Black Americans, and improvisation. Mahalia was the best person when it came to improvising. We Black people will improvise anything. So improvising and rhythms, I would say, is the essence of gospel music. Then there must be joy and happiness and passion. That would be mine. One can formulate a lot of definitions from what I've just said, but it's basically just that: rhythms and improvisation, and joy and passion.
Yeah. I so appreciate you saying the joy aspect, because I think a lot of times when we think about gospel music, what is often so many times what's missed is that like very natural and innate spirit behind it. And I love that you say joy. That's really important.
Well, when we are performing or singing gospel, we're not thinking about all of the specific details, the technical details. We're just happy.
Right.
We love, anybody, young or old or in between, we love to sing gospel music.
Right.
We don't know why. We don't think about the theory of it. And that was where I found education for me very helpful, because it gave me the opportunity to understand theoretically what is this music, label it.
Right.
But it's not for everybody. It's just for me or educators. The average person just wants to be happy and feel good, and it makes one feel good. It's the joy, especially if you are accepting of Christianity. That is really key to a person who's professed Christianity,
right,
and understand Bible, because the gospel is actually the first 4 books of the New Testament.
Right.
Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John.
Yeah. And then we got another question that is, what's your favorite song to play? And
oh my goodness.
Right. And has that changed throughout the years?
Difficult. That is difficult. I just love music. I don't have one favorite. I think something's favorite and I hear something else. I play this and play that, play that. Music is just, to me, a gift. And I love making music for people, for myself. I don't have any one type or one music that means more than anything else. It's all wonderful, all good.
Right. I agree. And then to wrap it all up, this is a really good question here. Detroit and Chicago are so prevalent in the history of gospel music. Can you speak a little bit to why are those two cities in particular prevalent in gospel music, and is there a difference in the sound and the approach?
Of course, definitely. Yes, definitely. However, many people think of Chicago as being the birthplace, and it is. If Chicago, however, is the birthplace, then Detroit is a relative. You ask about the difference, and you ask about the difference in the sound and why is the relationship. The why has to do with the fact that the cities are logistically close together. Detroit is known for its many, many, many churches and church broadcasts and recordings. You've got people who are secular and sacred in Detroit. Stevie Wonder, Michael Jackson, not Michael Jackson, but the other person who was Motown, the Motown person.
Right.
Major, pardon?
Is that Quincy Jones?
No.
Nope.
The owner of the company, Motown, the owner of Motown.
Right.
I can't think of his name. But you've got that type of strong influence in Detroit. And then the other is that Detroit is a little more progressive.
Right.
Very, you got educated musicians there who do everything. Where Chicago is just joy. And not so much emphasis on education, but just on doing it. Detroit is a little more advanced in terms of education and sophistication. That Barry Gordy is the name of it.
That's what it is.
Barry Gordy, but that would probably be, I think, the specific differences in Detroit and Chicago. They're very similar. But Detroit is a little more polished, a little more versatile, diverse, where Chicago, you don't have that extent. That's why the Voices and Body were so good, because of the diversity. But in Detroit, that's a very common thing, very common. Diversity in Detroit is far broader than, I think, Chicago. But that's how I compare. They're close together logistically. 4 hours difference between the two places. But Detroit just has everything, where Chicago is primarily knocked down, drag out gospel music.
I feel like that might still be the same. It might still be
the
case.
Atlanta, I don't know. Atlanta's a lot of people have died in Detroit. And Detroit, a lot of people have moved out of Detroit.
Right.
So I think Atlanta is probably the new Detroit type. Or even DC and now that area.
Right.
New York and DC, you got Apostolic Baptist Church, you got Alfred Street Baptist Church in Virginia. Right. You got Hampton, all those out east, all those churches and choirs.
Yeah.
So Detroit traditionally was it. Chicago would always be the capital, no matter what. Right.
I'll take this is one more, and then I think we might have to wrap things up here. But so this is from Chris Fisher, actually, who says that they had the privilege of being in the CLC while you were there directing the community choir. They said, I really appreciate the combination of classical and choral music, gospel and others, and I really miss that combo after you left. how was that time for you? They said, I think we frustrated you a little bit since most of us weren't professionals. So I thank you for your patience.
CLC to me was the best. It wasn't even a job. I loved CLC and the students. It is the best kept secret for a choir or any musician or a director. I literally loved the CLC. And they may not know it, but they could sing anything. They didn't have the experience, but before I went there, there had not been anybody there. But the people there, they were hungry. They were ready they were just ready. Just give it to them, they take it and go with it. So I love CLC. It was just a tremendous. I was there 12 years almost. With the New York, with the China, there were 2 choirs when I went. There were 4 when I left. There were about 45 singers all total, and when I left, there were about 155 singers. So CLC was the place to be.
Dr. Clency, it is a pleasure to be able to speak with you today. Our time has completely flown by. There's such a wealth of knowledge here. And like I said, it's just really been a pleasure to talk with you. Thank you so much for joining us today.
It was my pleasure.
Yes. As a reminder to everyone, WTTW Chicago Stories, The Birth of Gospel, which will premiere on all WTTW platforms on Friday, May 6th at 8 p.m. Central. Please join us on Friday, May 6th at 11 a.m. Central Time for The Birth of Gospel, a behind the scenes preview and discussion. Robin Robinson, the founder of Birdland Media, will moderate a discussion with the documentary's producer, Stacy Robinson, and Reverend Dr. Otis Moss III, senior pastor of Trinity United Church of Christ. In addition, on Tuesday, May 10th at 1 p.m. Central Time, you can join WFMT's Back to School Virtual Assembly. WFMT General Manager George Preston will interview Ryan Opera Center performers Lunga Eric Kalam, the tenor, and Chris Reynolds, pianist, alongside ROC Director Dan Novak. That is all for us today. Again, I'm LaRob K. Rafael, WFMT's weekend morning host. Dr. Clency, again, thank you so much for joining us today. It can't be overstated. And I wish you all the best, and I hope we can stay connected.
We must do that.
And thank you all who watched today, and enjoy the rest of your afternoons.